You are starting your essay this week, and I don't know how you feel about essays. I know writing is hard. I know when I was in school, any essay start filled me with a degree of anxiety because I had to think about, like, what am I going to write about? How am I going to start an essay? What am I going to say? Do I have a good message? And that really can be difficult, and that's okay. The thing I want to remind you is that first drafts, essay drafts, do not have to be perfect. They just have to be written. So, like, write a bad first draft. I remember meeting with a friend of mine who was going to school and I had started teaching, and she was telling me how she was so freaked out. She was afraid she would write something that was terrible. And I said, it's a first draft. Make your commitment that you were going to write a terrible first draft. And that kind of took the pressure off of her. We're going to be writing this essay in sections. And you're going to start with an introduction, and I'll get a chance to see how you start. I'll get a chance to see how you introduce the text and how you summarize it. And I'll get a chance to see your thesis. And that gives me a good idea. Are you headed in a good direction, or do you need to rethink? And then next week, you'll submit a full draft, and I can give you feedback on that. And then you'll have a final draft. And so it will be in different sections, and you'll get feedback. The other thing I want to suggest to you is that you visit the Writing Center. Why? Because having conversations with people about your writing can be really helpful. I have office hours on Monday, and so you can have a conversation with me on Monday. But the Writing Center is also helpful, and you get extra credit for visiting the Writing Center. So you can get up to 10 points extra credit for visiting the Writing Center on this essay. So let's talk about the essay. We've read 3 texts, and every time I've asked you to summarize a portion of the text in the discussion board and then respond to it. For example, you might say, Koenig felt disconnected from his Native American culture. And so he made a point to study it in college. And you might say, in some ways, I feel disconnected to my culture, and so I'm doing this. Or Koenig felt at home when he was at Standing Rock, and I feel at home when I go to Oaxaca. I think that was Leslie who talked about that in the discussion board. And so it's very much they say, I say. And so you're focusing on a very specific idea from one of our authors. And by the way, I've included the hashtag Honor Native Land video that we watched, because that has specific claims too that you could respond. So it's something very specific from a text that we've looked at, and then your response is connected to that. So Callie Linfor says her mother and her grandmother exposed her to disturbing things that taught her literacy as survival. And I wrote an essay. It's not really done. I wrote an essay is like in quite the opposite. My parents shielded me from the real world. And so literacy became survival for me because it was my connection to the real world. So it's very much Christoph says this specific thing, and here's what I'm going to say in response to it. That's why I wanted you to read chapter 4 of They Say, I Say, because we can agree by adding new examples or by clarifying things. We can disagree by saying and explain why. We can agree and disagree. And in a way, that's what I'm doing with Callie Linfor, is my life was not anything like hers, and yet we both came to the conclusion that literacy is survival. So, questions about that? I'm going to stop this share because I want to go straight to the prompt. I can make this slideshow available after class, and it will also be available. I can make the slideshow available. I'm trying to get out of, here we go. Let me go over to our, sorry about this. There's a little, okay. Let me go to the prompt. You're seeing more than you need to see, but the prompt. If you have not read this prompt, you should read it, and you should read it carefully, because this prompt is how I'm grading you. This prompt is what you're required to do, and it is, if you don't do this thing, this They Say, I Say essay, if you write some other thing, no matter how good it is, you won't get the grade that you want. So prompts are always, here's what I'm looking for. Now, I always have this box here, and like, what is your project? What is it you're setting out to do? Who is your audience? We've talked about audience. E. Shelley Reed talked about primary audience. Your primary audience is an audience that's interested in stories and who has not read the reading that you're focused on. So you're assuming, if you're responding to Callie Linfor, that your author does not know the Callie Linfor text, or that has not read hashtag, or has not seen the hashtag Native Lands video. And so your summary has to set the stage for them, create context. You should not tell them everything, because not everything will be relevant, but you can't assume that they're going to have knowledge that's needed. You're going to choose one of our texts, and it's going to be at least 1,000 words, which is, well, our longest discussion board or reading journal has been 1,000 words. And keep in mind, that 1,000 words does not include the heading, and it does not include the works cited page. So it's 1,000 words of an essay. It's worth 200 points, and the introductions due on tomorrow. And you're going to respond to other students on the discussion board and give them feedback. Full rough draft is due next Thursday, and then the final draft is due the following Saturday. Important. I'm going to let you read this, but let me summarize this. In order to join the author's conversation, you have to first introduce the text you're responding to, that's the They Say, and then you're using your own stories and observations to add to the author's claims. This is the they say, I say essay in the sense that you have to review what an author says in order to create context for your own stories. It's important that you use a specific example rather than a general idea, and this allows you to ask and answer a question related to what the author learns and what you learn. It's a they say, I say essay throughout the essay. It isn't just, I'm going to say 3 things about the text and the introduction and then leave it. No, it is a dialogue with the author. Here's what the author says, here's how it's connected. And that's going to continue in almost every body paragraph. So the other thing that you're going to do is, we've talked about rhetorical strategies, comparing things, using language that might evoke emotions, showing one thing leads to another, offering evidence, statistics. You are going to mirror at least 2 of your authors. We're going to call it a mentor text because it's a guide, rhetorical moves, things the author does in the text. We're going to talk about that more next week. But you might notice that an author starts the essay a certain way, and you might want to mirror that in your essay. You're going to write an in-class reflection. Oh, it won't be an in-class reflection, but it'll be online. You can tell I've taught this prompt before. So you need to have a meaningful title, an introduction that does the things we're going to talk about today, at least 3 body paragraphs that reference relevant passages of your text using citation, summary, paraphrase, and analysis, and your own response to it. And then a conclusion that ties everything up, and at least 2 rhetorical strategies from the text. Again, be sure to read this prompt. Now, let's go back up here, because you've got to choose a text. How do you choose? Well, write about what you know about and what you care about. Like, what's really interesting to you from some of those texts that we've read? Taylor, I'm going to put you on the spot because I know you were with us on Monday. Can you share what you're thinking of doing in this essay?
Yeah, I'm thinking about writing about honoring Native land and how it's impacted just how I look at in Native Americans and how I respect them and appreciate them and try to not appropriate them.
And so that will, I mean, it's a short video. It's, I don't know, 3 minutes, and it's going to require you to say, this is what I saw in the video, or this is what I heard in the video. Things you saw and things you heard are both important. And then specific claim, here's what I am doing. Here's what it made me think about. Here's what it made, how it's changing me. Here's what else I need to know. And in every paragraph, Taylor will be referencing some aspect of that short video. That video is very focused. It has one really main idea. And so Taylor will probably be using most parts of that essay. But Ezekiel had a very different idea. Ezekiel, you want to share briefly, very briefly, what you plan on doing?
Sure. So since we had that story by Nicholas Kristof about learning something from Hispanic Americans, even though Hispanic Americans face discrimination, they end up living longer, and it's because of the strong family ties and community ties. Similarly, I agreed with Kristof. At the same time, I thought he could it's also important to acknowledge there are other cultures who are doing the same thing, such as people in the Middle East. They do face discrimination because people think that they're one type of person. However, from what I've seen, what others have told me, they're not what people think they are. They're very kind, very generous people. So I wanted to stress that it's not only Hispanics. It's in other cultures they have these same the same attitudes, I guess you could say, towards their community and family ties.
Thank you, Ezekiel. When we talked on Monday, I thought maybe you might need another ethnic group that faces discrimination, but I think you could really write your entire essay comparing, like discussing the Hispanic communities and the beautiful things in Middle Eastern communities. And Middle Eastern people really do experience a lot of discrimination right now. A lot of people do. But these things, Ezekiel and Taylor both had, now I'm stumbling over my words, but my point is there were articles that really spoke to them. And so they're starting with these articles that really spoke to them, narrowing it down to specific things in the text that spoke to them, and thinking about what from their own life, what from their observations can they do to join that conversation. So Taylor can say, here's the conversation and here's how I'm responding to it. And that's a really good way to join the conversation. And Ezekiel is saying, here's what Christoph said, here's what I know from my own community, and here's what I've seen with my Middle Eastern friends. It's not only Hispanics that have characteristics that we can learn from. And so I think that those are important ways. For you, choose what you know about, what you care about, what you're curious about, because you'll have more to say and your passion will show through. And in your essay, you'll need to show and don't just tell. You'll need to think about details from the text that your audience needs to see, but also details from your life and your observations that the author needs to see. And you're adapting to your audience. What do they need to know? What do you want to accomplish? I think that Taylor's probably thinking, it's not just about her, but other people can learn from this about how they can honor Native lands, how they can honor Native people. And for Ezekiel, his purpose might be to challenge other people to look without bias against Middle Eastern communities, to be more accepting of the diversity in this nation. And those are things that are important for all of us to learn. And so I think they both have really good directions. And I would encourage you to think about what you're going to do. This is very much a they say, I say essay, and it needs to have a main point. You need to think about how are you joining this conversation and what is your message. Now, before you start, just as Ezekiel and Taylor did, you need to think about where you're headed. They both have specific things that they're thinking about. We brainstormed on Monday, and that was helpful. Both of them, we had two other people there too. Their ideas were just a little less developed, and that's why I called on Taylor and Ezekiel. But everybody took notes on, things that they could think of. And I would encourage you to take some time before you start writing to think about what which text. You might say, I'm thinking I'm on the verge of this one or this one. That's fine. Just start brainstorming. Sometimes people do cluster maps, where they, put a center thing and they've got the little spider lines that think about, those are great. scribbling on a page, that's helpful too. It's an informal outline of ideas, ways you can respond, ideas, examples you might want to explore. As you're writing, think about, you might write in spurts. As you're writing, you might move in a new direction. Ezekiel might focus on Middle Eastern people, but he might also realize, oh, I want to talk about other ethnic groups in America that I've observed. You will be writing more than one draft. Always expect to do that. And don't worry about correctness. Remember I said the best draft is a written draft. It doesn't have to be perfect. I have grammar issues all the time. Sometimes I start a sentence and don't finish it. That's my writing process. Your writing process might not be the same, but it's okay. We all have different writing processes. I will share mine because if you don't have a writing process you're comfortable with, mine might be helpful and you might adapt it. So, any questions for me before we move on? Okay, so you are writing an introduction. Now, if we were in a classroom and we had a 2-hour block like we normally do, and I could see people's faces, yeah, sometimes Zoom is not the most conducive to group conversations. It's just weird. But anyways, what do introductions do? Well, introductions introduce a topic. Introductions provide some background information on a topic. Introductions make readers want to read the topic. And introductions provide direction for the rest of the essay. And I think all of that is super important. And those are the things your essay, your introduction is going to do. So the very first few sentences and even your title introduce your topic. And they make an effort to show your audience what you're going to write about and how interesting it is. And then they need to provide some background information. Now, we have a they say, I say essay. So the background information is the text that you're responding to. You need to introduce that text. And then provide a very short but relevant summary of the text's conversation, the conversation you are going to join. Now, for example, Koenig talks about a lot of things in his essay. He talks about broken promises from the government. He talks about conservation and valuing the land. He talks about his disconnect from his heritage. He talks about visiting reservations with his mother and being bored. He talks about how because he has a white father and an Indian mother, that he always felt like he wasn't Indian enough, but he wasn't white enough. He talks about how his friends at school would make fun of him for being Native American. And they would ask really ridiculous questions like, do you sleep in a teepee? So, I mean, that's a lot of different conversations. You're not going to share all those conversations. You're going to narrow it down to one conversation. Because not all of it's relevant. You can't respond to all of that. Otherwise, you'll just have not a cohesive essay. It won't flow because it'll be moving in so many directions. So short, relevant summary, introduce the text, short, relevant summary of the conversation you are joining, and then brief background on how you're going to add to that conversation. Again, don't tell them everything about what you're going to talk about, just a little bit. And in doing all of this, you're going to be engaging, making your audience feel like this matters. You also need to indicate your main point. This is generally the last sentence or the last two sentences in your essay. It's your thesis. This is the takeaway from your audience, for your audience, what you want them, what you're going to show them in this essay. Yeah, let me go to the next thing, which is my essay. I have this sample essay available on Canvas. You can read it. And it's where the video is. That's similar to what we're discussing now, only I did it in 11 minutes. 11 minutes, this is a lot of information to cover in 11 minutes. So I spoke really quickly because I know watching videos that go on for an hour get boring. So anyways, my sample essay is in response to Callie Linfor. She talked about 1977, when she was a very little girl, 5 years old. And I was older, I was 17. And so I start within 1977 because she starts within 1977. And this is one of the ways I'm mirroring her strategy. She sets a time, I set a time. And so that's me in 1977. That's my husband, the one I'm still married to now. Yes, I met him when I was 16. And I got married when I was 18. Sort of crazy, but no, we're still married and we're really happy. I do look really naive, and I was. And there's Callie Linfor, and there's Jack in the Box in 1977. Yes, I worked for Jack in the Box in 1977, and I will mention that. So here's where I go. Keep in mind, I need to have a strategy that introduces the topic, draws my readers in. I need to introduce Callie's text, provide short summary, respond to it very briefly, and then have a thesis. So here's how I do this. And you are going to do something very similar. You should be seeing my essay, and you will see I've got a title, Opening Minds and Expanding Worlds. And I start with a very general, they say. Americans believe literacy, reading and writing are keys to success and learning. But recently, many have begun to wonder what kind of learning is most valuable. I'm just going to tell you, this is sort of a template from chapter 1 of They Say, I Say. And that's a great way to come into a topic. But I have to expand. So after all, some kinds of knowledge or skills seem incredibly practical, and other kinds of knowledge or skills seem absolutely useless. After all, how many people actually need to know the elements of the periodic table, the reasons for the Civil War, or the mating habits of turtles? I want to know all these things, and so does my friend Callie Linfor, who shares an office with me at San Diego State University, where we teach writing. I never wondered why we felt compelled to know everything and share those things with other people until I read Joyous Survival, The Literacy of the Hillside Strangler and Anything Extra We Know, a narrative Callie wrote for Dialogues, a publication for writing teachers. And now I have introduced the text. You know who Linfor is, you know where this was published, you know when it was published. But I haven't really given you a summary. So now I'm going to have a very short summary. You'll notice my summary is one sentence. I read in shock about how she learned about the Hillside Strangler in 1977 as a 5-year-old, along with the phrase ligature marks, how her mother and Grandmother shared stories of rape and domestic violence, how she was terrified to walk alone to the library because she feared getting grabbed and put in a van, and how literacy, learning any context of knowledge that helps people navigate the real world, became survival for her. It's a long sentence. It is grammatical, but I'm describing what she's doing and what she talks about, and her main point that literacy is survival. So basically, one sentence introducing the text, one sentence of summary. And now here's my response. Again, it's going to be a couple of sentences because I want to be very quick. I want to guide my readers, give them a sense of here's the they say, I say conversation that we're entering into. Here's what Callie says. Here's what I say. So I knew nothing of the real world in 1977. I spent my days at Aurora Central High School reading Baudelaire and Candide, and when I finished class, I changed into a bright orange and yellow Jack-in-the-Box uniform and brown polyester pants and flipped burgers and fried tacos in order to save for college. I wasn't afraid of anything, and literacy meant nothing more to me than reading and writing. And so I'm describing her real world and my very artificial world. I'm describing how she was afraid and I wasn't afraid of anything. She thought literacy was survival. I thought it was reading and writing. And now, so my summary connects to the summary I provided for Callie. Needs to show relevance. Now I'm going to respond. So I've got one sentence. I have come to agree with Lynn for. Literacy must be more than reading books and memorizing data if we are to survive in the real world, where we cannot escape the realities of the real world by pretending they aren't there. And that is my thesis. So I'm going to talk about the real world. I'm going to talk about literacy. I'm going to talk about how literacy leads to survival. Questions about what I'm doing in this text. It's not what I'm saying, it's what I'm doing. Yeah, Ezekiel?
I know this sounds a little silly, but so when we write our introduction, because I noticed that you have certain points in bold, should we put our main point in bold and our first sentence like that in bold, or no? You just showing that to us?
I'm just showing what I'm doing.
Okay.
Yeah. I want you to see very clearly what I'm doing so that you know that you can do these things. And okay. I think that that's super useful. You do not need to put your thesis in bold, but I wanted to highlight my thesis.
Okay.
And you'll notice in some ways, this sentence right here, however, over the years, it's sort of a transitional sentence that sets up the thesis. And those are nice. Those kinds of transitional words and phrases and sentences help connect the ideas. Which was your they say, I say reading for this week, is like connecting the parts. These kinds of phrases are super useful for showing how your ideas are connected. I'm just gonna, I'll talk about this next week, but I want you to think about this paragraph. What I'm doing is I'm talking about myself. And so this is an I say, but down here, I'm back to Callie because I can't leave Callie behind. If I'm joining the conversation, I really need to be connected to that conversation to show how I'm joining it. And so back to Callie, I've got a couple of quotations from Callie's text and then my response. And then I can, Callie, me. Callie, me. Callie, me, me. And then here's where I didn't finish it, but these would just be me, me, because I'm setting up how I'm joining the conversation. This part is a little harder. The introduction, though, it's a little harder because you have to really, really think about, how am I joining this conversation? And I want you to think about that. But for now, I want you to think about it with your introduction and thesis. By the way, the more I wrote, the more I knew where I was headed. And I actually changed my thesis once I started to get the ideas on the paper. And that is also okay. Any other questions? Yes, there's a question in the chat, which is strangely hard for me to access. I can't see that question.
I was just asking if we should write a hook, or if we can just like get right into like the they say I say. And
You,
like if we do,
you absolutely need a hook. And I'll talk about strategies for the hook. I provided a general they say as my hook, but you'll provide some other kind of hook. And I'm going to talk about possibilities in just a minute, Amanda. Good question. Any other questions before I move on? So when you introduce your text for the first time, you need to provide some things, like you need to have the author's full name. Callie's my friend, so in the essay, I refer to her as Callie. We are on a first name basis. I don't call her Professor Linfor, and I don't yell across the hallway, hey Linfor. She wouldn't mind because she's got a great sense of humor. She would just laugh. I actually told her about how I struggle with calling her Linfor in class. But you want to provide the author's full name, and generally you refer to the author by the last name throughout the essay, because you're not on first name basis with these writers. You'll notice I had something about who she is, and you'll want something about the author's credibility. You know, like, what does your audience need to know about this author? You'll need the title of the text and where it was originally published, the year when it was published, and something about, you know, like what the author is doing. Here's what let me show you with E. Shelley Reid how you might introduce it. And this is a sort of a template and that you can use. For example, in 10 Ways to Think About Writing, Metaphoric Musings for College Writing Students, published in the textbook Writing Spaces, English Professor, very short, concise who she is. E. Shelley Reid lists strategies for rhetorical writing to help readers learn how to communicate clearly and to write for real audiences. Super quick into it. That could be an entire sentence. E. Shelley Reid is not one of the texts you can respond to, but that's how you might introduce it. And maybe one more sentence of summary. Or same template in What I Found in Standing Rock, published in the Players Tribune. College basketball player Bronson Koenig describes his experiences at the Dakota Pipeline protests and realizes he has become a role model to Native American children, something he could have used when he was a child. I want you to notice in both of these summary introductions, I'm not saying says, tells, talks about. I'm talking about what they're doing. You'll remember in chapter 2 of They Say, I Say, there's lists of verbs. Choose those kinds of verbs. Describes, realizes, lists. These kinds of verbs really, really help you introduce a summary in a meaningful way. Questions about that? As much as possible, I'm going to take you to those chapters in They Say, I Say that are super helpful. The things we read there are things that you're going to be using in your writing. Now, Amanda asked about, like, can I just get into introducing the text? And I said, no, there has to be something else. I started with a general statement that provides context or background, and then yeah, this is a context, and then you provide background, and finally get to your thesis. Sort of a general they say. Those templates are in chapter 1 of They Say, I Say. You could also begin with a short anecdote. In another version of my essay, I started by talking about what my life was like in 1977, and then transitioned to what Callie's life was like in 1977, and then went right back into my thesis. You could do that. You could begin with an epigraph. This is a short quotation that sets the tone for the rest of the essay. It's normally above the introduction, in italics, centered under the title. And then your first sentence of your introduction would be sort of analyzing that quotation. Your follow-up does need to analyze this in order to lead into introduction of the text. And that quotation should not need context. If it's something that people go, what? Then it's not going to work. You can start with a question. However, do not ask a question that addresses your audience directly. Don't say, have you ever wondered, or have you ever thought about, or tell your audience, imagine you are, those kinds of things. This essay you can use first person, but I don't want you to use second person. I don't want you to use you in your essay, or to talk directly to your audience. You can also begin with a startling fact or opinion. And so you might, somebody might say, research shows that Hispanics live longer than white people. And this, and you know, like, that is a shocking fact. A fact that I think none of us knew before we read Christoph's article. So shocking facts are really, really good strategies for doing this. Any questions about that? Yeah, Ezekiel?
I was gonna ask, when is it appropriate to use, like, have you ever wondered, or any of those kind of questions? Is it appropriate more to use that later on in the text? Are you basically saying not to use it in the introduction, or not to use those kind of questions at all?
Not to use those kinds of questions at all.
Okay.
Okay, so you've seen that in writing, and it can be a really, really effective strategy.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's not used in academic writing.
Okay.
And because we are moving into academic writing, I'm going to say, let's, in this class, you know, like in your discussion boards, you can do that. The discussion boards are very informal. But with these essays, I want to move us into academic writing. And every essay that we write will have more characteristics of academic writing than the previous one. So we're sort of moving into that. So by the time we get to the last essay, it'll be academic writing, mostly. And then when you move into 116, that'll be a whole other thing. So just step by step. Any other questions? Yeah, it's kind of amazing. There are so many different types of writing and so many different types of audiences. And different audiences require different styles of writing, different, yeah, and so that's Shelley Reid, adapt to audience and purpose. And so since we're moving into academic writing, we're going to stay away from using second person. I'm glad you asked about that. So can you use an introduction or a quotation from the text in your introduction? Well, be cautious about that because remember your imaginary audience has not read this text before. And most quotations take a lot of context and analysis for just the quotation to make sense, and for your audience to know why you're using that quotation. And so your introduction is going to be 2/3 of a page to a page, but really doing a good job of analyzing a quotation setting up and analyzing a quotation can take half a page. And so you don't have that kind of space in an introduction that's relatively short to do that kind of work. And so be cautious. It needs to be a quotation that would make sense to your audience if you end up using a quotation in the introduction. Also, in general, in this entire class from beginning to end, I am not going to allow quotations longer than 3 printed lines. Why? Because that's not a writing rule, it's a rule for this class, is because I want to push you to use your own words and to really be responding to what other people say instead of using what other people say and not having your own comments. So questions about that? Okay, so it's 8:53. That's everything I have prepared to discuss with you. Let me just open it up for questions. I can see the chat now, so you can type your questions if you want me to answer them, or you can ask directly. I'm good with either, like any of that. And remember, there are no silly questions, really there aren't. And if you're asking something, chances are somebody else has that question too. Yeah, Ezekiel?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this point right about you're saying, not to talk about, like, have you ever wondered, or like asking personal questions like that. In the They Say I Say book, it says you can say, for example, so that's a little bit more formal, I guess. But when you're saying imagine this, that's when it's wrong, right? To ask a question like that.
For our purposes.
Okay.
Different types of writing have different styles. And so that actually can be a great rhetorical strategy for some audiences, but not really for an academic audience.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I know that's kind of tricky.
Yeah.
It is kind of tricky because you've definitely seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do another style of writing, it might even be really useful. But for this essay, it would not be.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I do want to, any other questions? Because I just thought of something else that I wanted to show you.
I have one question.
Yeah. Audrey?
So you want it to be in first person, correct?
Yes, you may use first person. it's we're talking about your stories and your observations, and so it would be very, very strange to use third person to talk about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So
So it's
you
okay to use I.
yes,
Okay. Thank
I,
you.
my, yes, absolutely, yeah. I want to show you. I want to go to the discussion board because I want to talk about. I want to talk about the kind of feedback you're going to be providing to other students. There's that. There's the quiz. Choosing the topic. There's the video that's similar to what we just did. Here is some discussion about the value of a peer reader. Make sure you read that. And here's the discussion board itself. Now, you're going to post your introduction on the discussion board. And you're not going to get any points for your post. You get points for your response. So you won't be able to post, you won't be able to respond until you have posted. So there's that. I will not comment on late introductions, and if you submit your work late, you may not get comments from other students. You're going to comment on 3 introductions, and if a student already has 3 comments on their work, don't comment on their introduction. Because if you're the 4th person, you're not going to get credit, because I want everybody to get 3 comments. You'll need to read the introduction, the student's introduction, your peer's introduction, all the way through from beginning to end in order to get a sense of what that author is doing. And then go back and make comments. And you should number your comments so that everyone is distinct. You know, like, identify the type of hook. I see you're using an anecdote. I really like this because it was interesting. Or I see you're using an epigraph, you're using a quotation. I wasn't really sure how it connected to the rest of the essay. And so, you know, like, you're just commenting on that. Name the type of hook, and then, you know, like, does the essay flow from there to the they say and I say, or did it seem like it wasn't related? And that's you. It's like, I didn't see the connection, or I totally saw the connection. And then the author should introduce the text smoothly. It needs to have the author's name, some sort of credibility, the title of the text, when it was published, where it was published, and a brief statement of what it's about. Say, oh, I didn't see the year it was published, or I don't see who that author is. Taylor, and those of you who are using #native honor native land, you'll probably want to find out what's the organization that put this together, because that's more like the author there. What is the they say? This should be a concise summary that includes the chief claim the author wants to respond to. Are there any parts that don't seem relevant? And you might say, wow, you had 4 sentences of summary. It doesn't seem like maybe you need all of that. Or I think you need this, but you may not need that. And then what's the I say? Does it flow from the they say? Keep in mind that the author has an entire essay to develop those ideas. So, you know, like, if I'd said everything in my essay in the introduction, then I wouldn't have anything left for the body. So I just had 2 sentences, and very, very concise. So you might say, wow, that seemed really long, or those things didn't seem connected. And so you're just commenting on what the author's doing. Not really if it's, not if, if you don't like it, it's just like, I see this might be too much, or I say this might not be enough. And then, is there a thesis? And here's where you can talk about, like, the thesis seems really clear. I think you're going to talk about this. Or the thesis does not seem clear. I don't know what you're going to talk about. And so, yeah, that's what you're doing there. It's 9 o'clock, and I always want to keep us to the 8 to 9 range. So if you have questions, we'll stay on for a little bit longer to answer those questions. But otherwise, you are free to go. I just want to make sure that I've responded to all of your questions and that you feel prepared to post your own introduction and to respond to what other students are doing. So, any questions? Okay, then we will wrap this up. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Yeah, Ezekiel?
No, I was gonna say thank you.
Sure, sure.
Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Spoiling. I hope you have
Thank
a good time
you.
in Palm Springs.
Oh, thank
Bye,
you.
thank you.
You too, Audrey. So you're hanging out here. Other questions for me?
I got a question.
Yeah, Jose.
Like about how many sentences should the introduction be?
Well, mine goes a full page.
A full page?
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed that, but mine is a full page. Yours will be probably, if it were on a piece of paper, I know it's just getting posted
Yeah.
to the discussion board, so that changes the shape of it. But yeah, it's going to end up being about 2/3 of a page. Like 1 or 2 sentences as your hook. 2 to 3 sentences of summary of the introducing and summarizing the text, and 2 to 3 sentences of your response, and then a sentence of your thesis. That takes up space.
So we have to choose the article, right?
Yes.
Like if I want to do like the Hispanic paradox, I have to like write the hook and then you said summarize it, right?
Well, you're summarizing a specific part of it. What part do you want to respond to? Do you want to respond to his discussion about, like how being community oriented, sticking together as a Hispanic community and caring for each other helps, like people be resilient? Do you want to respond to the part where he says that family is everything, that like the Hispanic community, they're so connected to family that they take care of each other. And so that brings joy into their life. And, and people can learn from that. And then you provide your own examples from your own family and how your parents and your grandparents and your aunts and your uncles and your cousins will do everything for each other. I mean, you've got to be very focused. You're not responding to everything in that text.
Yeah.
You're choosing one part of that text to respond to.
I want to talk about how they have like a low mortality rate and like all of that stuff.
Well, that's all of that stuff, because remember, the rest of the stuff, he's giving reasons why they might have a more low mortality rate.
Yeah. because
And
of the
you
family
don't have
thing.
any evidence on the mortality rate, so you've got to focus more on his reasons, because
Yeah, yeah,
you don't have that. You can say he says that, but then your response really isn't to that, because you don't have anything to add to that, unless you have all your grandparents live to be 100.
well, almost.
Then you might be able to respond to that. You could say, you know, like I knew my grandmother and she lived to be 90, and my great grandfather lived to be 89, and then my grandmother, she's 75 right now, and you know, like I think that it really is that, because my grandmothers, they never miss church. And you know, like my grandfathers, they never, you know, like I never saw them drunk. You know, like sometimes they'd have a beer, but they were never drunk, and they always went to church, and they gathered, you know, like, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can talk
yeah.
about their long lives and how they did the things that Christoph says are necessary.
Okay. For the writing, can I use the They Say I Say book like to like get ideas and something like that?
You can. There's lots of, it's not necessarily ideas, it's strategies for putting the words on paper.
Yeah.
And I talked about, you know, like chapter 1, I talked about chapter 8. I talked about, you would be agreeing with his claim that people live a long life, and then saying, providing new examples in the form of your grandparents and your great aunts and uncles, if you did that. So it's agreeing and providing new examples. So that's one way that you would do that. And you could also, when you use quotations from Christoph's text, you'll be looking at chapter 3.
Okay.
Kevin, do you have questions for me? Kevin, are you here? I think Kevin may not be with us. So, any
So
other
it's
questions, Jose?
so the introduction is due Thursday, right?
Yes, tomorrow.
Okay. Is it gonna be like a whole essay, right?
You will be writing a whole essay, but this week it's just the introduction. Next week
Okay.
it's the whole essay.
All right. What's it called? I find it kind of hard to like do all this stuff because it's online. It's not in person. Like I find it kind of difficult to like do all the works and all of that. You know?
It is hard. You'll see that like this week and next week, almost everything is related to the essay. So there are a few of those other assignments. I would suggest, Jose, that you make an appointment to meet with the Writing Center.
Yeah.
Do you know how to access the Writing Center?
No.
Okay, let me show you. So this is Canvas right here. Do you see Canvas right now?
Yeah, I see Canvas.
And over here on the left, you can click on SWC Tutoring. And you choose a topic, and you would choose English and literature. Let me see if there's writing down here. No. So you would choose English and literature, and you'd click on that. And that takes you to the online meetings that you can schedule an appointment. You can go, yeah, this is how you can set up that's how you access writing, the Writing Center tutoring.
Okay.
Okay, so it's really easy. Let me just go into, do you want an online meeting? Do you want a one-on-one meeting? And then you can schedule it. And that's how you do that. And they'll send me a report, Jose,
Yeah.
and then you get extra credit.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. All right. That's it.
All right.
Thank
Have a
you.
great rest of your day.
You too. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.